Cross it like a T, it's all the same to me. This game I play, I do it every day. Promise I'll be fine, bear it every time. When you turn the lights down low, when the color help me
All right, man, I'll be right back. I gotta go record this podcast. Okay, well, this is gonna be a weird one. Enjoy the podcast.
This pulls me through to the other end.
And welcome back to the SuperCaZt, everybody. I'm your host, the man who put the super in SuperCaZt, the Super Foch. And as always, I'm joined by my good buddy and co-host.
Steve Z, the man who put the Z in SuperCaZt.
And this is a bit different episode for us. Normally we will talk about a movie, we'll explain kind of the plot of this film, and then kind of our interpretations or experiences or whatever. But we're still going to do that, basically. But this is a film, if you don't already know, this is a film that recently came out, and it's getting a lot of buzz, for good reason. It's won some awards, even over the weekend. It has some really, really good performances. And today we're not going to go step by step on the plot necessarily. My good buddy Steve is going to kind of explain the movie, starting with the title if you don't know what we're talking about.
Yeah, so it's Everything Everywhere All at Once, and there's really never been a movie that's titled better than this because, I mean, if you ask me, are you going to try to put everything in a movie? And is that going to work? Guess what? They did it. They put everything in a movie, and it works.
Yeah.
And I mean everything, as in every genre, every style of music, every possibility that could happen in life, different frame rates, different feels, different genres, everything. And plus, it's saying everything about life too, so it's crazy. It's everything that you could think of.
You would think a movie like this would not work. Like, you would think it'd be so convoluted and packed to the brim with stuff. And probably with a lesser team, it would be. It would be just all over the place. And it is all over the place, but for good reason. And they make it work. And I think that's the biggest surprise about this film. You go into it, first of all, if you haven't seen this film, we will touch on some spoilers. But if you've not seen this film, whatever your expectations going into, at least for me, is probably not going to be correct.
No.
What about you, man? Were you completely fooled, so to speak?
Well, it's kind of what you were just saying. I didn't expect it to work as well as it did. Because,
Right.
I mean, I heard all the hype. I mean, I wanted to see this movie last year. Even when it first came to, like, Redbox, I was like, I'm going to go get that. And I
Yep.
just put it off. I just was busy, had other things. I was just waiting for that right time. And, yeah, I was expecting trippy. I knew that to expect that. This was going to be a head trip. It was going to it's going to be weird. But what I didn't expect is how they made this sort of convoluted concept very accessible. I think that's a unique thing, that you can take something like this concept, this high concept, explain it in just a few minutes, and then pretty much anybody can follow the movie from there. Yes, they're probably going to be thrown wherever the movie takes them.
Yeah.
But at the same time, they're not going to totally get lost and end up in, like, after 10 minutes of watching it and say, what's going on? I don't get this.
Right.
I think it's still accessible, no matter who you are. So I think that's amazing to make a movie like this. And I think it goes really to the uniqueness of this movie as far as its production. This was a movie helmed by these guys. They're called the Daniels. I don't know if you're familiar with them. But it's Daniel Kwan and Daniel Scheinert. And they're just like two friends that direct movies together. The only one I'm kind of familiar with is this one called Swiss Army Man. And it stars Daniel Radcliffe as a dead body.
Yeah, I've heard of them.
Yeah, so that's like my only concept of them. And then this movie they started in like 2010 and just reworked the script several times. They were getting so mad because Rick and Morty was like stealing all their ideas. They're like, crap. So they'd have to go back to the drawing board. And this film went for everything from Jackie Chan being the main character to finally they got it as Michelle Yeoh, and the cast just fell into place. And then they made this movie in 2020, but it didn't come out till 2022. So that's another unique part, that post-production. This movie was probably edited so much and tried so much different types of music, so many different feels to it. I mean, it's just perfect in my opinion.
Yeah, I think this movie is going to speak to a lot of different people. I think this movie is going to affect people. You and I have talked about that several times over the phone, is how this movie affects you, because that's the biggest takeaway. And obviously movies do affect people a lot. That's not abnormal. But the way this movie affects, at least from my experience, and I think everybody's experience is going to be somewhat different depending on, well, just who you are, where you come from, what you're dealing with in your own life. But I think anybody can get anything, no pun intended, out of this film. I think there's something for everyone in this film, is what I'm trying to say.
Definitely. I mean, it's a very universal film. Not everybody in here can relate to every single thing, but I'm sure out of the three leads, you can relate to one of them. You've probably been in their shoes before. So once again, going back to the brilliant script, I think that's where it starts. To me, just going back to what you were saying, the film just does speak to you in different ways, and you're going to get whatever out of it, because you're going to be on the edge of your seats at times. You're going to be laughing hysterically at times, and you're probably going to tear up too if you have a heart.
Definitely.
It definitely all the emotions combined.
You know, we say a lot of times that movies take you for a ride, and I don't think there's ever been any better explanation of that phrase than this, because it definitely is a ride from start to finish. As we said, we're not going to go scene by scene of this film, otherwise we'd be here for a while. So we're just going to give you kind of a quick little review, kind of what we thought about the movie, our kind of initial thoughts, and we ask you, what did you think of the movie? Have you seen it? Do you want to see it? You let us know in the comments. But Steve, let's go ahead and start with the cast a little bit, because I do think we should honor the brilliant cast of this film.
Yeah, so the first character we get introduced to is our lead, Michelle Yeoh as Evelyn. And Evelyn at the beginning, she is experiencing everything. She is her business is being audited, her marriage is falling apart, she's estranged with her daughter, not having the best relationship. She and her dad don't have the best relationship, and it's just the most stressful day ever. And I think Michelle Yeoh, her just starting out like this, you can feel it. You feel her overwhelmness. I mean, she just ignores certain things that are happening in her life. It's because she's just got everything going on, and that's just very relatable. And as the movie goes on, she goes through this ride of where she is going to be called into doing some action. She's going to have to do some emotional moments, and of course, some great comedy too. She's just so much variety in her performance, and that's why she is up for all these awards and winning a few too. I think it's a great performance, and I'm so glad that this actress that we talked about before in our Tomorrow Never Dies review, we gave her so much props for that one. Over 25 years later, she's tearing it up and still doing it. It's awesome.
Yeah, I think she definitely is just a bright spot in this film. As you said, her character's not living the best life at the moment. You know, she's going through all these troubles, and as we said, we've all been there. We've all had these dark moments in our lives and dark periods, and you know, she's definitely someone to relate to. And I thought her performance was incredible. I thought it was just really, really good. I was not expecting to be blown away like I was in this film. But definitely, as you said, deserving of all these awards and nominations that she's getting. The guy in this film that we're both familiar with, that's getting a lot of praise right now.
Definitely. Kia Kwan. I just got to take a pause right here and talk about this guy.
Yes.
I don't think it could happen to a better person. I think he's so cool. Like, just hearing his story of him as a child star, the disappointments he had, his turn to becoming like a fight choreographer, and then just coming out of retirement for this film, and what a performance! I mean, it's perfect. I mean, he does the comedy, obviously. He does the emotion. He does all that stuff, but he says it with such conviction. Like his speech is when he tears up and he's so emotional. I feel it. It's like hits
Yes.
my heart. And
Yes.
his character Waymond, I just identify with him so much. I feel like Waymond so much as the person that's trying their hardest, but it's sometimes not always appreciated.
To me, and this means no offense to Michelle, because she deserves everything she gets for this film, and she's great. But to me, this is the movie for me. I think his performance in particular, and if you're not familiar with this guy, he has obviously had a bit of a career as a child star, being in Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, and of course the Goonies. And as you mentioned, he's been a fight choreographer, so he's been in the business for quite a while, but he's kind of been, MIA the last several years. I mean, you heard about him choreographing for movies and stuff, but he just comes out of nowhere, and I don't know, it was an inspiring performance, to say the least. I mean, I'm almost speechless. Like, I'm trying, I've been trying for days now to come up with accurate description, because he blew me away in this film. Like, you forget Short Round, you forget, anything else that he's done. This guy has really reinvented himself, but he talks about the other roles very, very good, and he is definitely embraces that, and that's awesome. But I think as a adult performer, I think you want to be known for your adult performances once you get there, and I think he more than exceeds expectations for this film. I think he is just magnificent, and this role, these roles per se, just he knocks this out of the park, and I can't say enough about how watching him was inspiring to me. It really was. And if for any other reason to see this film, it's this performance for me.
Yeah.
Because he makes this film, and we talk a lot about rewatchability on films, and sometimes that's not always the case. I think it is in this instance, just because of his performance alone, but all the other performances are fantastic too. But I think every time I've seen this movie, and I've seen this movie, I guess, 3 times now, I feel like I've gotten something different out of even his performances alone every single time.
Yeah, definitely. And I'm glad you mentioned the part about they playing multiple roles, because his transition from regular Waymond, who's supposed to be the biggest failure of any universe, I guess you'd say, to Alpha Waymond, it's just, I love that transition. He just puts his finger up to his ear, and he's a different person now. And it's just awesome seeing that transition, how that actor can just go boom, boom, and all of a sudden, he's back to Waymond. And I love that one scene where she gets so disappointed. It's like, it's you. Why? How are you going to help me in this situation? And he's like, what's going on? And he actually ends up being the hero. I mean, he's the one that saves the day. He's the one that I guess his way of approaching life and his way of fighting, as he calls it in the film, his philosophy is what gives Evelyn the courage to I guess defeat the bagel, as we'll see. So he's I love him. Like I said, everything he's getting, it's great.
Yeah, and he's just so genuine, and he's so humble, and you see that with other actors and other entertainers a lot. And it's great, but I don't know. He's not taking any of this for granted. You can tell he is soaking up the moment, as he should, as he very well should. All of these guys, I mean, from the directors on down, should bask in this glory, because it's such it's a fantastic film already, but also with these performances that we're talking about, and just with this story, as we mentioned at the top, a lot about this film should not work just because it goes all over the place. And you watch these films, and you could probably think of one right now off the top of your head, that kind of gets convoluted. But this movie does not. This movie keeps your attention, and it is good enough. The writing. What do you say to that? Do you feel like that's what it is? It's just really strong writing that keeps the story, afloat, so to speak.
I think so, because the first part, the everything part, establishes all the conflict, and it's the real world conflict.
Mm-hmm.
It's your
Right.
business is being audited, your marriage is falling apart, your relationship with your daughter is on the skids. All that's kind of like real life stuff, and that's real drama, and they give you that first, so you get invested in that. And then when all the weird stuff starts happening, whenever she gets in the elevator, that just adds to it. But the thing is, yes, you're going through all these different dimensions and seeing all these different things, and sometimes you're like, what's going on? But all that stuff's done thematically. It all works well within that plot. It still goes back to that original conflict, because by the end of it, once everything kind of starts getting to the climax, all those plots start intersecting, and that's what really matters, is her making peace with Waymond, their marriage being repaired, her dealing with the whole tax thing. That's the big thing, and just those emotional moments. And I love it how it all ends up to that the confrontation and the two different worlds at the same time come into play in that emotional moment where basically the stars have been aligned for her and Joy to reconnect, and that's just really cool.
Yeah, definitely. And I like how you mentioned that, because I was actually watching a film yesterday that you're probably familiar with, and that's Spider-Man No Way Home. When he goes to Doctor Strange, he tries to change his past. He tries to change something, and there's obviously consequences with that. And I think this film touches on that a little bit too. And there's just so much heart in this film, and that's something that I really didn't latch onto until I saw this movie a couple of times. Is that kind of how you felt too? Did you feel like there was more heart in this film the second go around, or how did you experience this film watching it multiple times?
My thing was, the first time it was just the experience. I was just soaking it in, everything that happens. I was enjoying the ride. Yeah. But to me, it's whenever you watch it again, you start to get what it's really trying to say. Those things get highlighted. At least it for me. It's almost like almost overwhelming the first time you watch it.
It is.
Yeah, it's an attack on the senses, but not in the same way like the Northman, the last movie we talked about, was. This one's definitely in a different way. But there's a few more performances I want to get into before we kind of get into the big parts of the film and what it's trying to say is. So we've got a young actress in this film. She's up for some awards too. Stephanie Hsu. She's playing Joy, and she also plays our villain of this film that we find out about halfway through the film. It's Joy, and her name's Jobu Tupaki. And what do you think about that character, Jobu Tupaki?
Oh my gosh, man. I knew you were going to ask about this character. I really liked her. I really liked her performance. I thought she was a very... I'm not familiar with her, so I, didn't know her before this film, but I really thought she did a good job. There's not a weak performance in this film, is there? I mean, I was trying to think of somebody that I just did not like, because there's always that one person in a film that you don't like, and I really can't think of anybody off the top of my head. But her performance in particular, I thought was really good. She does well with what she's given. I think she's really an interesting character, and I thought she was great.
Yeah, I think her real world stuff is really cool. Once again, she is very good at playing off that feeling that I think some people can relate to, is when you and your parents just don't jive. And as Jobu Tupaki, she's everything. She's funny, she's scary, she's unbelievably powerful, and then she gives you this sadness part of her that just lets you know why she is what she is, and that's just the shocking part. And it's really cool visually how they were able to pull her off, because this movie has a pretty small budget for most movies that do stuff like this. For a high concept like this, $30 million is not much.
Right.
So that's like, some of it's like just basically the actress doing her thing, but with the lighting and all that stuff combined. Yeah, her initial introduction, I think that's one of the coolest scenes of the whole film.
I
Because
agree.
the first time you watch it, you might have suspected it, but you didn't see it. I love Evelyn's reaction. Joy, why do you look so stupid? and, and then she's just like comes in and blows that guy's head up, and that's what I was disappointed. I watched the trailer, and the trailer almost gives away too much of the film. Like that scene right there, I was like, okay, that's not good. But she's great. I'm glad she's up for awards. There is one performance I think it's good, but I think people have overrated it a little bit, and I love the actress. She's great, and I think the performance is good. But I don't think it's Best Supporting Actress worthy good, and that's Jamie Lee Curtis as Deidre. Do you want to defend it?
You know, I will, just for the sake. I'll let you be the bad cop. I'll be the good cop. Just because that's the way to go. I liked her in this film. She kind of stuck out, obviously, but I didn't mind it. It's not my favorite role in the film. And I agree, I don't know that she's deserving of the awards like these others are, but I do think she adds an interesting element to this film that I was not expecting. There's a lot in this film that you're not expecting the first time you watch it. I mean, you know, she's definitely not my favorite part, like I said, but I will say that she adds an interesting element to the film that was kind of surprising. What's your thoughts? I'm curious.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's really good, that one scene where she is kind of going over the whole thing and she's circling the receipt over and over again. That's a really good scene. It's a very good acted. The fact that she also contorts her body to become like a monster or something halfway through the movie.
Forgot about that.
This weird sort of thing with like a piece of paper stapled to her head. It's good. It's funny, and she's weird, but I just don't know if it's worthy of the others. And I know we're just splitting hairs now. You're just looking for something to critique from the movie. And I'm sure, being the humble person she is, she's probably saying, yeah, probably not the best, but hey, it's a good, memorable one. But the performance that kind of came out of nowhere for me was James Hong as Gong Gong. Because this guy, if you watch movies, you watch TV, you've seen this guy in a ton. And I just did not know he had this still in his system. I mean, we talked about him when we talked about his performance as Lo Pan in Big Trouble in Little China. That was, I mean, nearly 40 years ago. and this man comes out, and the biggest laugh of the whole film for me is the Alpha Gong Gong. Just when he's like, I am Alpha Gong Gong.
Yeah.
And
it's kind of like we talked about with Ke Huy Quan. You know, how they've had this career years ago, and then they just kind of show up out of nowhere. And I thought he was a real big bright spot of this film. Very funny. I love the scene that you were just talking about. So I was really surprised, because I was like, and it's funny because I couldn't remember what he was in, because he had one of those faces that I was like, oh my gosh. And I didn't think about looking up, because that's the thing. Sometimes with movies, I can like look stuff up, and you know, but I was just so into this film. I don't think I looked at my phone at all for anything, for at least the first couple times I watched this film. But he definitely struck a chord, and I agree with you. I thought he was one of the best parts of the film that really is kind of overshadowed by these other performances. But you got to give this man props, for sure.
Yeah, he's 94. He's out here doing this. That's crazy. Yeah. So I guess now is the time to get into some of the just the style, the action, whatever you want to get into. What else stands out of this movie other than just the performances?
Well, I mean, as you said, the style. I think styles, I guess you would say, because there's just so many different styles being thrown at you. And again, that is one of those things that I think for a casual movie person, or a casual person that maybe doesn't watch a lot of psychedelic stuff and that kind of thing, it's gonna throw people off at times. Speaking of the style, but I enjoyed it, especially the second and third times I watched this film. I think this is one of those films that gets better for me every time I watch it because I understand it a little bit better. So yeah, I think the style in itself is unique. We talked about it earlier about how these kind of films aren't really made, and as you mentioned, the low budget, and I think that's a really surprising thing to learn, is that you would think a film like this would have a pretty substantial budget considering everything it kind of deals with and portrays. But that's really interesting that this is a low budget film but just has a high budget feel to it.
And I think that once again goes back to the whole style of the film, the direction of it. I've never seen a movie edited like this.
No.
Normally these like quick cuts that are in the film or in the what it does with the sound, normally that would kind of throw me off and I would be kind of off put by it. But I think that disorientation at times is actually what enhances the film. We get put more into Evelyn's shoes as she kind of gets lost, because that's what big thing about this film is. She kind of sees all those possibilities of what she could be, and she nearly loses herself. She nearly gives up, and like falls into that sadness. And as we start to transition to more serious stuff, there's some awesome action scenes. They're so cool, and the music that comes accompanies that is great. The way it's shot is great. Ki Young Kwan in particular, his scene with the fanny pack, that's just epic. But to me, when it gets to the actual emotional parts, that's where this film shines.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. That's my favorite part about this film, is the emotional stuff. Because I really didn't expect that, or at least to the degree that you get it. Like, if you're going into this film, and we're being more vague than usual just because I feel like you need to go into this film with as little expectation as possible. I think that's how you're going to enjoy this film best, because if you think, oh, it's this silly, crazy action adventure kind of film, well, not exactly. It has that, sure, as we've mentioned, but there's just so much more to it. And that's probably my favorite part about this film, is the emotional part, just because I wasn't expecting it, and I really appreciate it, and it really worked. That's the thing that surprised me the most, is how they got the emotional stuff and the way you care about a lot of these characters, and we mentioned them a little bit ago. That's something that I think makes this film better, is that they truly make you care by everybody on screen. Some more than others, sure, as we've mentioned, but the heart in this film and the emotion. I mean, we've talked about it off air, of how this movie made you emotional, and that doesn't always happen a lot of times, even when it's supposed to be. But I think that's what this film does really good, is it really tugs at you, and it may not tug everybody. Now, don't get us wrong, this film may not be for everybody, but I really think people should at least give it a chance, because I think there is a lot going on in this film, and there's something for everybody, as we've said.
Yeah, and like you said, we're being very vague because we want more people to watch this film.
Yeah.
And that's why I'm not really getting in. I mean, I'll talk about here in a few minutes, like, what I think the film is about, what it's trying to say, but that's kind of my personal take.
Yeah.
But yeah, getting back to just how it all fits together and how it works. I don't know. I'm lost for words almost. How can you have a movie that has the action working the way it does with the comedy? And I'm not talking about comedy. I'm talking about laugh out loud. Just like, I did not see that coming. That's why I'm not going to reveal the biggest joke, in my opinion, the biggest running gag that you just think it's a throwaway line, but it just kind of made me just die laughing, is the thing with the raccoon. That's all I'm going to say.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
That's all I'm going to say, is if you know about the raccoon, my gosh, it's wonderful. But I guess the action, when it works, is it does a Matrix, but it does it in its own way. I mean, the fact that these guys thought of this system of writing kind of works. If you know your sci-fi, if you know about like parallel dimensions and sort of things like that, or the idea that every choice you make creates a different sort of path of a different version of you. The fact that they use this system, they kind of enhance her. Is like, oh, I need to be super good at this right now. So she kind of goes to that, and you have to do a weird thing to kind of do this too. That's once again coming back to the comedy. We have all this action going on, and all of a sudden these guys are trying to land on this thing. I'm not going to get into what that is, but it's just like one of the most random scenes of any movie I've ever seen. So I'm laughing, but at the same time I'm enthralled in the action. It's a trip.
That's a good word to put it. You know, it definitely is a trip because there's a lot of emotion, as you said, but surprisingly amount of comedy in this film. I was a bit surprised on that too, how funny this film is, but it's not necessarily a comedy. I wouldn't necessarily call this a comedy film. I think there's comedy in the film, but I think what this film does the best is it explores a lot of different things. It explores serious situations, explores, you know, the comedic stuff, as we said, but it's all over the place. And a lot of the times, again, that's a bad thing. That's sometimes a bad thing because movies should kind of stay linear and not go all over the place because it kind of throws people off. And I see this movie doing that to an extent with some people, especially the first time or two you watch it, because it did for me. But I think if you accept what you're watching and not try make it something it's not, then I think you're going to have a really, really good time with this film.
Yeah, and that's the big advice. You kind of just go for the ride. You don't second guess it. You just go for it. And you'll know when it kind of changes big time is whenever it does the 2001 thing.
Yep.
To me, when that happens, I'm just like, okay. Because the movie's kind of normal until that point.
Yeah.
And then it gets very crazy. But my big critique about it, the first time watching it, was I was thinking maybe it was too long. But then I started thinking about it, and I was like, no, I think it has to be its length that it is for the experience to work. For the moment when the giant bagel is introduced, you have to kind of accept that because it's one of those things, sort of like when we're talking about Ghostbusters. If you pull out the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man at the beginning, it doesn't hit it at you as much as it does at the end.
Right.
So whenever they bring in that, it hits as a comedic, sort of weird, sort of absurd thing that you've been experiencing the whole film. So you're kind of used to that at that point. Yep. But it's also the depression of Joy, the character. It hits you now. It's like, oh, I feel it. And I feel how this conflict is real now. And whenever it gets defeated the way it does, it makes it that much more satisfying, that much more rewarding. And the epiphany that Evelyn has in that moment, I felt that epiphany. And so I guess that's a big part of the experience is you have to become immersed in this. You have to become flooded into it, and then your brain becomes more accepting of these big concepts, perhaps.
And as we've said, I mean, I think this is one of those films that can really benefit watching it multiple times because of everything that happens. I mean, there's a lot that goes down, and I think this movie's written and made in such a way that if you watch it multiple times, you're going to get something different out each time. And I know a lot of movies do that, and a lot of good movies are really good at that. But I think that's really the case here more than anything because of the differences in tone and just all the different characters out there. I mean, there's just a ton of different characters. And so, you know, for me anyway, for my money, I really felt like that the first time I watched it, it was intriguing and it was interesting and it was good. But it was like the second and now third time and probably fourth time. I'm probably gonna go watch it tonight again. Just it really just gives you something each time. And my biggest critique on it would be kind of like you, is that it's a long film and it may be too long for some parts, but I don't think that necessarily is a bad thing for this kind of film because it has to tell a pretty crazy story. And if you're into the story and you just kind of let it happen, wow, it's fantastic. And it's storytelling that you don't see a whole lot, but it really is pretty epic at the end of the day for me. I don't know that I'd call this film an epic necessarily, but as you said, quite a trip. And the more times you can write it and experience it, I think the better and better you'll appreciate what this film is trying to do. Because, and I guess that's how we can kind of close this. What do you think ultimately this film is trying to do? You've seen this a few times yourself. What do you think this film is really aiming for at the end of the day, man?
Yeah, so I'm going to try to do this in as few words as possible, just
Please.
because, as I was telling you before we got on recording, after I watched it the second time, I just started typing like a madman. I was just,
Sure.
all my mind was flooding with all these thoughts about what I thought the movie was saying, what I was thinking, what I was feeling.
Yep.
And I'm just going to pick on like one big idea, I guess.
Sure.
So I think this film is very complex, it's very complicated, but like I said, it's still accessible. Everybody can watch it, get something new out of it, something different. And I think it's a very personal experience in that, is that everybody's going to leave something different. So that's why I'm not going to get into everything I took away from the film, just picking one big thing. And it's the part that always echoes in my brain when I watch it, is when Waymond is giving his impassioned speech and he tells everybody, just be kind. This is how I fight. Yes, it's a weird, messed up world. Yes, it's a very confusing world. That's a big thing I think the film is saying at that part of the film, is that it's very confusing. Things don't make sense. Stuff's going to happen. People are going to hurt you. But you just fight the best what you can, and that's what Waymond's saying. Be kind. Just try to make the world a better place. And I think every decision you have, every conversation you have, every person you meet is an opportunity to make a new choice. And you can either choose to be a jerk about it, you can choose to be selfish, choose to overlook the situation and notice that that's a big deal. But ultimately, you can also choose to be kind. And I think that's my big takeaway from the film. I think that's my biggest powerful thing that it says. But it says a lot of other than that. But that's, to me, that's the biggest.
I completely agree with that. I couldn't say that any better. I think that's what I really felt like with this film. Again, the amount of heart in this film, it was surprising to me, because I knew the comedy stuff was there and I knew the style was going to be there, but the heart in this film, which is maybe not always present, maybe not always obvious, but I think at the end of the day, that's what this film is trying to do too. I think it is trying to show how to be the best possible person. I mean, we live in crazy times, and every day there's chaos, and what can we do as individuals to try to combat that? And to put it simply, and I think that's what this movie does say simply, is to be kind. And it sounds simple, but it's not always that way. And there's going to be things that'll get in your way, and there's going to be things that challenge that mindset of being kind. But that's what it's supposed to do. That's what's supposed to happen, because it's not easy, and it's difficult, and there's going to be things that you have to overcome, and you have to be willing to overcome those obstacles. And I think that, I completely agree with everything you said, and I'm not going to try to step on it again, but it just, there's so much going on within this film that I think that if you have not given yourself the opportunity, if you've been kind of on the fence, at least try it once. If it's not for you after the first time, fine, move on. But I really think everybody should at least try to give this film a good one watch, because you just might find something within it. And I think that's all that needs to be said at this point in time, really.
Definitely, we highly recommend it. Check it out if you haven't already. If you have, come and join the conversation. We'd like to talk to you about it. It's definitely a film that we'll probably revisit later down the road.
Sure.
And for a reason. And if you haven't paid attention to any news, it's tearing it up in the awards.
Mm-hmm.
Highly think it's worth all that. This is an ensemble thing. All the actors, all the filmmakers, perfect. It's great.
Listen, guys, we do appreciate you so much for being a part of our show. We are just getting started back, so be patient with us. We've been kind of hitting some snaggers too, but we're going to get this ball rolling and get going pretty well. So just keep an eye on our YouTube channel. That is SuperCaZt with a Z. If you're not following us on Twitter, please follow us at SuperCaZt, because we do post questions. We've been posting trailers, and obviously our recordings will be on there too. If you're not following us on YouTube, please do, and share if anybody that you know loves movies. And as we've said, join the conversation. Let us know what you think about this film. I'd be glad to hear from you. Man, it's been great. I really enjoyed talking about this film. And guys, just hang with us and join us next time. And for my buddy Stevesy, I am the SuperFosh. I'm going to see you guys next time on the SuperCaZt.